and it'll. Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome. This is Jeremy Fricke. I'm the Education Director at Interfaith Initiative, and you are here today for Making the Familiar Strange on the Rich Man and Lazarus. It's a parable which Sierra and Ally will be talking about today. But yeah, so thank you for coming. Could you go to the next slide, please? So Making the Familiar Strange is a series that we have every month. It's on at noon on the third Tuesday of the month. And we have two main goals. The first is to learn about different Abrahamic scriptures together, often with someone from those communities leading the conversation, so we can learn a little bit not only about the content, but also kind of how it affects people personally. The second piece is we also want to encourage perspective taking. So we're looking at familiar stories or concepts from new points of view. And these new points of view are either from the presenters and or from the people who attend, just like you who are here today. We hope that a lot of the time includes some conversation. All right, go to the next slide here. So some ground rules when there is discussion. Please be as respectful as possible and challenge what you think you already know. Also, we really try to model speaking from our own point of view. At the end of the day, we are guided by our communities. We are influenced by our religions and all these things. But often, everyone has a little bit something a little bit different or something a little bit special to add at their own level as well. And for the purposes of this, there is no wrong answer. This is, again, intended to bring out new perspectives. So don't be afraid to talk and have questions or comments or anything like that. And without further ado, I would like to introduce both Sierra Salgado Pirigyi and Ally ZimmerMas, who are welcome to introduce themselves as well.
Thank you, Jeremy. My name is Sierra Salgado Pirigyi. Great job on the pronunciation, Jeremy. I say that slow because I know it's a lot. But I'm the Communications Director here at Interfaith Initiative. I've been here at Interfaith since December 2019. I started doing some contract work, and then I was hired full-time in February 2020, right before the plague. So I've not met a lot of people in person, but I've met a lot of you via Zoom, and I'm excited to get to know you more and more as we gather in person more, as that's more possible. A little bit about my religious background. I wasn't raised in any faith tradition, so I like to joke a lot that I was raised a strong atheist. I didn't go to church. There was a small period of time when my mom got remarried where I went to church for a little bit, but for the most part, really grew up kind of as a nun, as a nothing, but have done a lot of work connected to religion in adulthood. So I've been doing interfaith work for a long time, and I used to work for what is now my church, Urban Abbey United Methodist Church. So 2 years ago, I decided to get baptized, and I became a United Methodist.
And I am Ally ZimmerMas. I am the newest staff member at Interfaith. My title is Education and Program Associate, and I've been here since sometime in April. I don't know the exact date, but it's been great to be joining this team. And I come from a Catholic background. I studied Catholic theology in both undergrad and grad school, so I hope that will help me to have something interesting to say, but we'll see. And then, oh wait, before we move on, Sierra, do you want to ask the first question?
Yeah, so this is, if you've been to Making the Familiar Strange before, you're aware of this, but this is a group discussion, so we really want to hear your voice. Again, there's no right or wrong answers, and we'll be asking questions kind of throughout the event. And you can respond in the chat, or you can respond, we ask to stay muted unless speaking, just for background noise purposes, but feel free to chime in, and feel free to chime in the chat or via your microphone. But to get started, we just wanted to kind of pose, looking at the name of this story, looking at the name of this parable that we're going to talk about, the rich man and Lazarus. What do you notice? Or do you have any initial thoughts just based on the title?
Just that there was one man was rich, and Lazarus, as I recall, was poor and I think had physical problems. And so it just divides between the have and the have not, so to speak.
That's a great point. In the chat, I know Sharon and Jennifer mentioned that one is named and one is not named, which is a very good point. Any other thoughts on just the title? Great.
Yeah, we've got another addition to the chat saying that Lazarus is probably not rich, so perfect. I know some people who are familiar with Christian scriptures might also recognize the name Lazarus from being one of Jesus's friends, but that is a different Lazarus, just in case there's any confusion there. They weren't as diverse in their naming back then, I guess.
Yeah, also it has a connotation, like for me, like, one will, end up in heaven and the other in a much more, warmer place than heaven. So, it kind of has, that connotation without reading it. So.
Yeah, thank you.
Good thoughts.
All right. Well, before we get into the story itself, it belongs to a genre that some people might not be as familiar with. In the Christian scriptures, particularly the New Testament, Jesus often teaches in what are known as parables. And a parable is just a short, simple story used to illustrate or teach a moral, spiritual, or religious principle or lesson. So basically, a little story that teaches us some kind of a lesson. And you see a ton of them, particularly in the 4 Gospels of the New Testament. So we're going to start going through the scriptures one chunk at a time. Would anyone like to volunteer to read this first section of the passage?
I will.
Thank you.
Jesus said, "There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores."
Thank you. So again, this is about a third of the story, but at this point, what are your thoughts, or what do you think about the relationship between the rich man and Lazarus?
Well, Lazarus must have been laying at the rich man's door for some reason. I guess he probably was begging there or was asking for help.
Important point, yeah. Susie says not a close relationship. Sharon mentions the rich man does nothing for Lazarus.
I just think power and powerless.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I think it's very telling that you picked the first thing to have a dog in it, Sierra. I'm not surprised.
What a compassionate dog, too.
Yeah, maybe we should be reflecting on just the dynamics between Lazarus and the dog.
I think that if I'm right, the dogs at this time were really looked down upon culturally as opposed to today. And so even the dogs would come and lick his sore, show how low he is. in this scene.
Mm.
It's a really great point.
The rich man represented privilege, and Lazarus represented other, marginalized.
Mm.
And even the dogs recognized what the rich man didn't, that there was a human being that needed care.
The dog was more caring.
Then that, yeah.
No, you're not. You're muted.
Oh, no, we heard you. No, absolutely. Dogs seem to have more compassion than Lazarus does.
Yeah.
And I see one more thing in the chat from Sharon, who said that the rich man is extraordinarily rich. He wears purple. So that's a great observation, Sharon. So yeah, we're definitely seeing a not very equal relationship between the rich man and Lazarus, and not a very loving relationship between them either. So I think that's, oh, go ahead.
Also too, wasn't the color purple a sign of, Roman, nobility or Roman, society, at the time?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yep. And we've got the
Pastor Anna
affirmation.
affirms yes.
Yeah. Perfect.
It was a very expensive dye. So, and I think it's interesting that it's fine linen, which, suggests the workmanship necessary to provide this rich man with this material extravagance of purple and fine linen. In other words, we don't see the people making the cloth, dyeing the cloth, making the food, all those people behind his wealth.
Yeah, Sharon notes in the chat it was extremely expensive to make. So yeah, a sign of someone who's got big money.
Yeah, thank you. So now the next section of the passage. Do we have any volunteers to read this one?
Sure, I'll do it.
Thank you.
The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. He called out, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames."
Thank you. So now in this part of the passage, both of the men have died. So now that they're both dead, what do you think of the relationship and how it's changed, or whether it's changed? Any thoughts on the dynamic between the rich man and Lazarus now?
Well, now Lazarus is in the down position and is asking or needing food or water. That's a reversal from before.
Yeah, the rich man is now in that position, and Lazarus is the one who is in heaven, thank you, or in something like that.
Just by looking at this too and reading it, it's automatically assumed, that the poor man went to heaven directly, while the rich man went to hell directly. So we really don't know, what circumstances yet, led them, to go either, to heaven or hell, because, all we know now is one was poor and one was rich.
Yeah, and thank you. I also see Sharon put in the chat, the rich man still doesn't see Lazarus as an equal. He wants him to come and give him water. I really like that that addition to this.
I also like the fact that it turns out he does know Lazarus's name.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's true.
he recognizes him from hanging around his gate.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and
Is there an
Lazarus
assumption
is-
that he thinks that Lazarus is accessible to him in hell as if he was there with him?
That's what I get. It's like he might have asked Lazarus to do some little small chores for him while he was back in life. And now he sees something that Lazarus can do for him now in Hades.
Mm-hmm.
Send Lazarus. The way
Yeah.
he might have sent Lazarus to go help his friend push his cart out of the mud or something.
Mm.
Yeah. Another point that I've heard others bring up that's very similar to some of these that people are mentioning is that not only is he asking for Lazarus to serve him even from hell, but he still doesn't address Lazarus directly. He still goes through somebody else and doesn't well, like Sharon said, still doesn't see him as an equal or even as like a conversation partner. He still is just talking to Abraham, asking for that kind of service from Lazarus. So yeah, even though the power dynamics have flipped so that Lazarus is the one in a good position and the rich man is in a bad position, there's still something about their relationship that hasn't changed even with going into the afterlife in this story, which is really interesting. So now the last passage. Can we have one more volunteer, please? I know this one is a little bit longer, but it'll still be a good read.
I'll volunteer.
Thank you.
But Abraham said, "Child, remember that during your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides all this, between you and us a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us." He said, "Then, Father, I beg you to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they will not also come into this place of torment." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them." He said, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent." He said to them, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead."
Yeah. So what do you think about Abraham's response to the rich man's plea for someone to warn his family? Or both pleas for help and to warn his family.
You know that your time on earth is short. Follow the scriptures, whichever scriptures you believe in, and do right things, because you never know when your time ends. And when your time ends, it's too late. In the Quran, it's often referenced, that the hypocrites will often plead with God, okay, to send me back just 5 minutes or one day, back on earth, so I can repent, and live a right, God, I can't talk, a righteous life. So.
Yeah. Too little, too late, kind of. Yeah. Jennifer names that rich man is still focused on himself, and his immediate relatives.
I think it's interesting too that the rich man didn't strike Lazarus. He didn't chase him away, or it's like sins of omission rather than sins of commission. And what he did was neglect Lazarus.
Ignore.
And so he, I think the passage is saying we're called to enrich other people's lives. And that's what he neglected in all this materialism and hedonism that is suggested in the passage.
Mm-hmm. That's a great thought. Thank you.
I'm kind of sad for him that he's not able to share with his brothers, at least, you know, that he's going through the pain and learning the lesson, but he can't use that to do some good out of it.
Mm. Yeah, and Abraham's response is kind of like, well, they should know, like we've told you. Great thoughts. Any other reactions to this, or?
Well, I think that Abraham's looking to the entire wealth of the tradition, you know, Moses, the prophets. In other words, you've been told many times in many ways, and you've ignored the message. So it isn't like, you know, you were just told once or twice.
Mm.
I don't want to divert too much from what you're saying here, but another kind of overlay on this text is Luke is written to the Gentile audience. And so one of the things that Wendy was talking about was, you know, is it, I can't remember exactly how she phrased it, but is it, do you see people like right over there if you're in heaven and hell? And so not for today, but something that people might want to look up. Because it's to the Gentile audience and Greco-Roman audience, are the concepts of heaven and hell during that period of time. I think that would help you understand how some of this is layered. And it doesn't, I think it's also valid to speak to, you know, the tradition, and also the fact that in Luke, he's talking about if somebody rose from the dead, you're not gonna, he's pointing to Jesus, right, in this scripture. But as far as the tradition, certainly Abraham and Moses are things that are heavyweights in terms of saying, well, if so-and-so said, then it probably holds more weight than regular person X over here, or even the Greco-Roman God over here. But he is speaking to the Greco-Roman and Gentile audience in the book of Luke, which is unlike like Matthew is speaking to the Jewish audience and et cetera. So in this particular text, or of this like meta, the whole pericope, the whole section of text, you might want to look at how they understood heaven and hell. And then an interesting thing to consider is then how is your understanding of heaven and hell different than that? So I just wanted to kind of put that into the conversation, because all of that is layers of this conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Pastor Anna. Those are great points. Like when we're looking at these stories, it's always important to think about, yeah, like what's the historical context and who is the intended audience. And I know Jeremy and Ally and I had talked a little bit about when we chose this story about the fact that like hell is called Hades, right? So it's very much kind of speaking, using language that the audience was familiar with.
Thank you. So maybe with that, we can do a little bit more thinking about the story as a whole. And first of all, looking at that story and generally how it went for the rich man and for Lazarus, how do you think the rich man could have been saved, if at all? And do you think he deserves the fate that he was given in that story?
I think he could have potentially been saved during his lifetime if he would have looked at all others and all creation in a more equal way, and used his goods and gifts for the welfare of more than himself.
Yeah, maybe a change in worldview would have helped him.
And I don't think he would have had to gone totally into equal type of thing. I think if he would have just shared and cared and talked to, as opposed to being so separated and self-focused.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be nice if he'd do equal or even more, but I think if he would just do a little bit, he'd have a start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great.
You know, he may be thinking he's experiencing heaven here on earth by having everything his own way, but I've known some very wealthy people at times, and they aren't necessarily content and happy in their heart till they learn about life a little differently.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the rich man, absolutely, as anyone, could have been saved. This story is so apropos to where we're living and what's going on in society now, is that the rich man, due to class, being a man, and his refusal to see anyone as important, putting himself first, that selfishness and ego is what doomed him. When we were speaking earlier about a hell, not even so much a physical location of hell, but the spiritual depletion in him, and not being aware of or being concerned, put it like that, concerned about his brother that was laying with sores and in need of him, but literally probably stepping over him, points to his spiritual depletion, right? Being spiritually defunct. And I think, again, it speaks to all of us about making the choice to see each other and not see each other as other, but as human beings, as God's breath. And he failed to do that. And that was intentional. And when I think of that intentionality, I think of racism, I think of homophobia, xenophobia. It's a choice. So could he have been saved? Yes, but he would have had to make that decision to open his eyes and truly see.
Yeah, that's beautifully put.
Well, and I see the rich man, in today's world, the very rich. I don't know that they're sleeping as well as I do. Because their mind is always going for the grabbing and the keeping and the protecting their wealth or whatever. And it's a different mindset. And so to open their mind to the peace that caring for others and being a part of a world that cares for one another, there's just a different bodily impact on yourself that allows you to sleep differently than when you're just me-centered and grabbing.
Yeah, thank you. And I see that Sharon put in the chat as well, Lazarus was one person and the rich man didn't even make a difference for one person. So thank you, Sharon, for adding that.
Who was quite literally at his door. Like, you didn't have to go out and find him, right?
Mm-hmm. So I know that I think it was Susan who said something about what the passage might be trying to teach, but just for anybody, what lessons do you think this parable is trying to teach? Or what do you think Jesus's audience should take away from that in that context, in today's context, anywhere you want to go with that?
Well, I would say that, we are our brother's keeper, and we have to care, for people, despite, their class, structure, because we cannot be content in life and also in the hereafter if, we don't, help, our brothers and sisters, around us who don't, have things. So, I think, too, that is a universal concept, among the three faiths. Do unto others as you would have, done unto you. I mean, that is, gospel, that's canon, that's Sharia, that's just law. So, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
In fact, the parable is point blank trying to say, and this goes into other gospels, not only Luke, although Luke talks a lot about money, but other parables and other texts also talk about this, that the way to get into heaven, the way to build the kingdom of God on earth, and the way to get into heaven itself is, what did you do for these people? God is inherently, through the scriptures, on the side of the poor, the oppressed, the forsaken. And if you want to be with God and doing God's work, you must be too. And so the lesson is, if you want to get into what God is doing and into heaven and into all these different things, then you must live in this way.
I think it's interesting too that the passage begins with a reference to a gate. And, it doesn't just say he was outside or on the patio or whatever. It was a gate. And the whole idea here behind that word is relationship. And so we are called to relationship, not to division. And so the spatial separation between Lazarus and the rich man in the opening of this passage of Luke, I think it's really important. We're supposed to have togetherness, relationship.
And it just points to the obliviousness also, because even from that place of hell, Lazarus is still saying, the rich man is still saying, tell Lazarus to dip his finger. Not, could you ask, tell him, because I still see him as he's my servant, even in hell. He should just do what I'm saying, being at his beck and call.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I had a situation just this week, and it's not exactly about the rich person, but I was down at M's Pub, sitting outside, and which, so I had money to pay for a meal. And there was a man who was obviously dealing with mental health problems and had on a sweater and a jacket and carrying some bags, and he was being verbally kind of abusive towards people and walking around the streets, and then came in and close to where we were, and I had that sense of, how do I react? What would I do if he comes up and starts harassing us at the table? And it's not exactly this, but it's about how you treat someone else. And I reflected on it a bit. I hope that I would have responded with compassion and just maybe, how are you doing? But at the same time, there was a certain sense of fear about him being aggressive or assaultive. So just throwing it out there. I mean, it's how we treat anybody in different circumstances.
Everybody.
Thank you for sharing. And yeah, I think, sometimes we might have, I don't know where I saw this quote, but I saw a quote at one point that was like, our first thoughts are often kind of how we've been conditioned culturally or in the society. But what's important is like the second thought, right? Because if you're pulling back, like, wait, that's kind of what really matters, because sometimes our initial reactions might be just conditioned over so long, but like being able to take a step back and see people for people is what matters the most.
I would just note that the word saved is a word that isn't really part of salvation is certainly part of the conversation in Jewish teaching, but saved has a connotation that I just haven't spent a lot of time with, but the concept in Judaism to put all human life, dignity of all human beings being the path to righteousness. And so righteousness as opposed to salvation. And then I'm wondering kind of like the non-dualistic piece of being able to see yourself in both the values of people who have something that you covet and people who the opposite of that, and how we see ourselves in our need to see ourselves in both sides of this story.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Wendy, for adding those thoughts. I know that one thing that I like about pieces of the Bible like this that are challenging is the discomfort that comes with them, but also like what Wendy was saying, the need to question our own assumptions, or maybe if we assume that we are the rich man or that we are Lazarus, but don't consider both sides, I think we don't get as much out of it as if we do see that we aren't so different from either one in a lot of situations or in a lot of ways. And I think just connecting it to some other things, I think spiritual poverty is also an important concept to Christianity, and recognizing that you are in need and you don't, well, at least in my experience of Christianity, the need to recognize that we aren't self-sufficient has been influential. And I see Jeremy just put something in the chat. It's a little paragraph. So Jeremy, would you like to unmute to talk about what you said?
Sure. Just kind of adding on to a couple of other things I've heard from Pastor Anna and others. I find it beautiful and fascinating, especially kind of in an interfaith context here, that even though Luke is authored toward the Gentile, the author uses the ethics of Judaism as the cornerstone of understanding this situation, right? It uses Abraham and Moses, not necessarily like Jesus and even arguably John the Baptist, right? And I think that's interesting that there's a focus on religions outside of the religion that is being spoken to. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? So like, addressing the Gentiles, talking about Judaism toward Christianity is like, it's a whole lot of different religious diversity happening at once in this context of the story.
Jeremy, but up until then, wasn't it still, Judaism? Or
it starts getting a little more complicated around the time that we think Luke is written, that the Jesus movement within Judaism and Judaism are have a progressively more complicated relationship with each other going into like the 2nd century.
Okay, thank you.
And
I think,
if anyone knows more than I do about that, then go for it.
and I think what you're suggesting is something similar to what I was noticing at the gate, and at this decisive point, the master of ceremonies was Abraham, not God.
Truth.
Great observations. Well, I think I'll move us on to the next segment of this. So Sierra, do you want to take it away?
I'm very aware that there's a Methodist pastor in here, so I'm going to try to make sure I am accurate in all my info. No, as a Methodist, so again, I was not raised a Christian, and I was working for a church before I became a Christian, so I had the opportunity to literally hear sermons 3 times a day, right? So something that really interested me in Christianity and something that was really fundamental in me deciding to become baptized, become a Christian, was around money. That I learned so much through Urban Abbey, and Sharon's here who also goes to Urban Abbey, about money, and that Jesus talked more about money than really anything else. So as a Methodist, I just kind of wanted to name some of the things that this story speaks to me and my beliefs, and how I try to navigate the world as a Christian around money. I really appreciate a lot of the social principles of the United Methodist Church. A few things that are named in their principles around our economic community. Methodists were really on the forefront of kind of the labor movement, so it's pro collective bargaining. The principles name the right to a living wage. It also names that we have a responsibility to exercise our economic power in a way that benefits humanity and doesn't desecrate the world. So there are a lot of things in Methodist teachings that I really appreciate. Specifically, I wanted to talk a little bit about John Wesley, who founded the movement, and his sermon about the use of money, because I really appreciate John Wesley's teachings around money. And he says, essentially, earn all you can, save all you can, and give all you can. And there's kind of a condensed quote here around that. But he explicitly talks about gaining or earning all you can, but specifically in a way that does not exploit your body or others. And I remember my pastor, Reverend Deborah McKnight, telling us that work should not be something that forfeits your body or soul. It shouldn't be something that is exploitative. You should be able to earn all you can, but not in a way that's destroying yourself or exploiting other people. Saving all you can, and not necessarily building your 401k, but saving all you can in terms of being mindful and careful about how you use money. And then there's give all you can, and that is the most challenging, I think, for all of us. But just me personally, trying to live into this ethic of being able to give all I can. The way I look at it is it gives me and my money the opportunity to take small steps to change the world. And I love what this kind of earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can teaches me, and how it challenges me to prioritize. So we talk in my church about, we talk in Urban Abbey a lot about budgets as moral documents. And if I died tomorrow and someone printed off my bank statement, what would that tell you? What would you see from that? What is important to me? Is it stuff? Do I really love shoes and makeup, or do I really value my faith community that does a lot of great things in the world? Or do I really value nonprofits like Tri-Faith Initiative that are doing great work? So I think a lot about that. And as I've kind of grown in my ability to give, and part of that has been growing as a professional and making more money, I love being able to give more. And I've regretted things I bought a million times. I've yet to regret any gift I've given, whether that's to a nonprofit, whether that's $5 to someone on the street, whether that's to my church. So yeah, when we talked about the story, it just brought me a lot back to those principles around money in Christianity, and specifically in the Methodist Church, that really spoke to me, and are really a big piece of why I chose to become a Christian.
Thank you, Sierra. So for my part as a Catholic, there were kind of 3 main things that I connected to this passage, which there are so many things in the Bible that it could be connected to, or in the Catholic tradition that it could be connected to. But one of the things was my favorite, some of my favorite parts of Catholic teaching are what's known as Catholic social tradition or Catholic social thought or Catholic social teaching. It has a few different names, which are basically very similar to what Sierra was saying about the social principles of the United Methodist Church. It's basically the social principles of the Catholic Church. And my favorite one out of those, there's like a list, commonly 7, but it varies. And my favorite one out of those is what's known as the preferential option for the poor and vulnerable. And I think Pastor Anna said something kind of similar to what this is. And I like to think of it as how there's a special place in God's heart for those who are poor, vulnerable, oppressed, marginalized, and that according to this Catholic principle, society is called to put the needs of those who are poor over and above everybody else, since they're the ones who are actively hurting and in need. And it's my favorite principle of Catholic social teaching. And I think it relates to how the rich man would have been called to view Lazarus and respond to Lazarus in that parable. I also really like how certain Catholics have taken very seriously the idea of seeing Jesus in the poor. There's a piece of scripture in Matthew 25 where Jesus explicitly identifies himself with the poor, at least in my reading of that passage. And a lot of famous and not famous Catholics have taken that very seriously. Like Dorothy Day is a famous 20th century woman who is being considered to be declared a saint. And she said, quote, "I firmly believe that our salvation depends on the poor," unquote. And I've always really liked that quote and how it's challenging, just as the parable is very challenging that we looked at. And then also at one point I got to know some missionaries of charity, which that's Mother Teresa's order of nuns, if anybody's heard of Mother Teresa. So I got to know some members of that community, and they also take the idea of seeing Jesus in the poor very seriously and very literally, which I think is a great connection to the passage we looked at as well. And then finally, last summer, I got married, and at the end of the wedding mass, one of the blessings that the couple receives in a Catholic wedding mass says, "May you be witnesses in the world to God's charity, so that the afflicted and needy who have known your kindness may one day receive you thankfully into the eternal dwelling of God." And I like that both because that blessing imagines the poor acting as ambassadors of God's hospitality, but also I think it calls to mind a similar image for me that the parable showed, with having the poor person right there in a prominent place in heaven or something like heaven, and yeah, the need to actually care about them and show kindness, which I think also has an element of justice in it. So those are just a few things from my spirituality and from my take on the Catholic tradition that I thought of with this story. So since we just shared a little bit from our perspectives inspired by our traditions, we also wanted to know about what perspectives you all bring to this story. So our first question related to that is, what does this story remind you of? Are there stories in other scriptures that speak to these themes? Are there stories outside of scriptures, maybe just in secular society, maybe in traditions that you've just found interesting, but aren't necessarily, I don't know, anything, any connections that anyone came up with when hearing this story?
I know when I heard it, the first thing I thought of was the Jesus quote of, right, it's easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than a rich man to get into heaven.
I was struck by the way that the two people saw each other. The rich man and Lazarus saw each other at at the end of life, and where their lives had taken them, and that's just something that struck me also, that especially because the rich man tended to ignore Lazarus, it seems, and there he was, right in front of him, at a distance though. Also the chasm between them. It sounds like the chasm that has been noted in many of the editorials that I read about the way our economy is set up. There's a huge chasm between the very rich and the very poor.
You know what I got out of it too is, Islamically too, God, tells us that, we are tested with, what we do with our gifts. Our gifts, meaning income, skills, knowledge, education, strength, etc. So it's how we use those to, benefit, our society, our community, mankind, the earth in general, that we will be, asked about. Hey, Abdul, what did you do on earth, with your money? Or how did, you help your fellow neighbor, your fellow, friend, etc. So, God, that gives us, opportunities and gifts, things like that, not for just, us to keep, but for, us, to use, wisely. So, that's what I got out of this story.
Yeah, thank you. I see that Susan put in the chat the Beatitudes in Luke. And that was also one of the first things that I thought of, which it makes sense that Luke echoed those themes in Jesus's sermon on the plain in Luke's gospel. And Susan, you can say what you thought of particularly in that, but I know for me it's the blessed are the poor and woe to those who are rich that has, I think, direct ties to this passage.
I'm struck by the statement that you made, Sierra, about what would your bank statement say about you or about any of us, right? So how and where we put our dollars, our time, our resources, and how that changes generation over generation. Also, are you taking care of your own and only looking, with your dollars to benefit the things that directly impact you, or are you giving your dollars to things that don't touch your life? And then also, we've been talking a lot at TriFaith about socially responsible investing. And so not just as individuals, where are we giving our dollars, but how are we thinking about how what we value and how those dollars follow that, and is our theology matching with those decisions, both personally and institutionally, and in a capitalist society, how complicated it is to uphold the individualism and the collectivism.
Absolutely, those are great thoughts. Yeah, and I always think about it as like we kind of get a vote with our dollar every day, right? So whether I choose to buy something from Amazon or a local bookstore, all those things have just ripple impacts. Thank you, Abdul. I know we're kind of closing up. Any kind of final thoughts about wealth and poverty?
We haven't talked about how relative it is. The parable kind of exaggerates a very, very rich man and a very, very poor man, but wealth and poverty are relative. And to some people, I might look wealthy, but to others, I look poor. And when I look at other people, I may think they're poor, or I may think they're wealthy. It's all relative. But it also makes me think that as I encounter people every day, they may be in need of something that I'm not aware of their need. It may be money, it may be compassion, it may be support in grieving. It's not just wealth, and it's not just condition. It's all relative to where you are.
Really great point. Thank you, Jean.
I have a situation in our neighborhood that is kind of troubling to me. There's a gentleman as we go out of our neighborhood that is always begging, and he's there every day. And it triggers me every time I go by, because there's a part of me that wants to hand him a $20 bill. And yet another neighbor has told me that he's visited with this gentleman, and he finds that he makes more money there on that corner than he could ever in a job. And so I use this gentleman as a reminder to reach out to others. I don't give to him, but it's a reminder that there are people that are hurting out there, and I try to give in ways that I can, either time, money, or energy.
There's the verse in Timothy, the love of money is the root of evil, all evil. And it's not saying money is bad. It's just saying when people love money, the wealth or wealthy or whomever, that you put that before anything and everything. That's where that greater sin, that's where the wrong comes, because you don't see people anymore. It's about acquiring and chasing wealth. And I think from this Lazarus story, it shows that his money, his status was more important than any human being. So the lesson in all of this, well, at least for me, I look at our money and it says, in God we trust, and it's on our money. Money is wonderful when it's used to help our brothers and sisters, and to do things, of course, to keep us going, but we just can't put our love in money. Our God can't become money. That's how I see it.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. Jeremy, do you want to close us now that it is 1 o'clock on the dot?
Sure, yeah. So thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm just getting the survey link up really quick here. But I also, everyone who's registered will get a follow-up email. And I hope you join us next month. It'll be led by Nizam from AMI, who's going to talk about the call to prayer and some of the stories and ideas behind the call to prayer in Islam. So please join us then. And in your email, you will get a copy of the survey link as well as the recording. And I just shared it there. So please fill that out. It really helps us out to be able to improve our programs and to be able to show our impact on people with these various educational programs. So thank you again, and definitely look up, actually I might link the other thing as well really quick here, since I think we have it up. If you have not come to here, it's in the link chat now. That's next month's Making the Familiar Strange. So join us then as well. We do this every month. Next month will be, I think it might be the 4th Tuesday or something like that. Just because is it Eid al-Adha that ends up landing? So a lot of opportunities next month. So thank you again.
Thank you all.
If you have any questions or comments,